communism is pure hasad. Marx is filled with resentment. If you read his book, it's filled with resentment. It's all about getting what really belongs to us from the rich people. It's all turning, and it's all based on this resentment. Now, obviously, rich people like to hear that because they can say, yeah, exactly. It's just, they're just envious of us. They just want our money. But from the Sharia point of view, both have an obligation. The obligation of the poor people is not to envy the rich people. And the obligation of the rich people is not to belittle the poor people. So it goes both ways. But because one of them's not fulfilling their obligation doesn't mean that you become a communist to overthrow the status quo. That's the point. And nowhere in Islam does it say that you have to remain impoverished. You can go out and earn money. But it's difficult, to have accumulations of wealth tend to be traditionally in families. And it's still true to this day, that even though America, quote-unquote, land of opportunity, you can come here, work 80-hour weeks and start your grocery store, your this or that, and you work hard enough and you'll get the dunya. We already covered that in that section on not wanting to do that. Because right when you get it all, you drop dead. But the point being is that still most money, right? In fact, it's really interesting. In this country, over 90% of the wealth is in the hands of less than 3% of the population. So people that you think are rich, like a millionaire, if he's got $2, $3, $4 million, that's not real wealth. For us, obviously it is. But in terms of who's got money in this country, that's not real wealth. That's peanuts. And even Bill Gates, they did a thing on Bill Gates. Bill Gates is still only worth about 30% of what Rockefeller is worth, for instance. Right? So he's an upstart. Even though so the point is that money is a dula bain al-aghniya, which one of the reasons why Allah did something in the Quran which in terms of human history is extremely radical. The inheritance laws in Islam are designed to break monopolies. You see, if you look at the Sharia, it's designed to spread the wealth out. In traditional cultures, the progenitor, the firstborn, all the money would go to the firstborn. And in English culture, people were out of their houses, right? If women if they didn't have a male protector, they lost their houses, which is one of Jane Austen's themes, right, in her stories of women just literally losing everything because there wasn't a husband. She saw it as an injustice. Even though she's a comic writer, she saw it, as a type of injustice to women. The fact there's no male and they lose everything the moment the father drops dead because some uncle or distant cousin who's a male gets to inherit all the money because the women don't inherit it. In Islam, Allah broke that. So a woman would actually suddenly get money. Now, what did that do? If a woman marries, right, outside of the family, it takes money outside of the family, which was one of the reasons why oftentimes wealthy families like to marry within the family to try to maintain it somewhat. But you can see that in Islam. There really is an attempt to break down that type of monopoly in wealth, which once it occurs, you have a dula, what the Quran calls a dula, bain al-aghniya. Wealth only revolves around the rich people, and that will cause a type of resentment, right? So in Islam, traditionally, there was always a very strong middle class. And where you have a strong middle class, you're going to have a lot less social pressure than where you have an extremely wealthy class of, say, maybe 10% with all the wealth, and then 90% impoverished. That creates a massive tension. Whereas if you have, 40 to 60% in the middle somewhere, right, it enables the people down here to be able to, move into that middle class because it's not so far off. Whereas in this type situation, the gap is so great It creates resentment and hasad. And so poor people begin to envy the rich people. And then you're ripe for, the Communist Manifesto and this type of thing. And look how many people died. I mean, all those people that died, millions of people because of communist revolution. And it's all about resentment. And the other interesting thing about communism, nowhere is Marx critical of industrialization and massification. He never questions, the whole technological society and where it was headed. And Baudrillard wrote a really interesting book criticizing that aspect of communist critique, that they never deal with, factories. And, he's all just saying, well, let's make the factories, the people working in them own the factories. But is factory life, do we really want people to be working like that in those, that type of thing? That's never questioned. So that's a really important thing to reflect on, people, about this idea of resentment. And a lot of what people actually think is righteous indignation is nothing other than hasad, envy and resentment, really. Seen it a lot. And one of the things that you saw happen in the Muslim world is a lot of the communists, interestingly enough, in the 70s, in the 80s became Islamists, right? And changed all the vocabulary, right? And suddenly started talking about the social justice of Islam as opposed to the social justice of communism. And so Islam becomes a vehicle again to realize your own petty dunya aspirations, right? People have to be really wary of that type of Islam being used as a vehicle for anger that is not rooted in anger for the sake of Allah. It's rooted in anger simply because one is dissatisfied with one's worldly position, right? And that's a really tricky one, I tell you. And then he says also, وَلَا يُفِيدُهُ بِشَيْءٍ مَا وَلَا يُزِيلُ عَنْ مَحْسُودِهِ مَنُوِّلًا. He says, also think about this. It doesn't benefit you one iota to have envy, nor does it cause the one you're envying, he's not going to lose that ni'mah because you're envious of it. Allah gave it to him, Allah will take it away. It's not you that's going to do anything. So it's really a waste of time. Now he goes into the asbab, which is really important here. Because the asbab, if you understand the causes, you can understand, one, whether you've got it, and two, how to get rid of it. The first thing he mentions is adawa. Somebody it's your enemy. And so, like America, there's a lot of places that America is the enemy, so hasad, right? It becomes hasad. And the really interesting thing about a lot of these anti-American people, they're obsessed with American culture, right? So the guy hijacking the plane has Nike tennis shoes and he's got his T-shirt with Mickey Mouse on it, and orders hamburgers and milkshakes. I don't know, but I mean, you see it. American culture is just everywhere. It's just rapidly globalizing, right? Now, why is it that people in Beijing go to a McDonald's? Why? I don't understand, but they do. And so, the fact that a lot of people are anti-American, again, one has to question, what are they anti-American about? Is it because they're just envious of the fact that America happens to be the dunyawi most powerful country on the earth? Americans have the dunyawi highest standard of living, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is that the reason? Or is it genuinely, do they see that this is unfair? This is an oppressive society that's doing harm. So, again, people have to be really careful about what their intentions are and where they are. So, adawa is a cause of hasad. You might not like somebody that you're working with in the office, so when good things happen to him, you get angry. There's hasad. Just because adawa. Very common. Another one, tahabbub. Tahabbub is a type of hasad. There's almost an element of humor in it, but it can get quite vicious. And tahabbub relates to the object you have two people or more, and they all have the same object of desire, like parents, children, siblings are fighting for parental love. Mother only has a limited amount of time in the day. She's got 5 children. So those children are vying for her attention. And there's a book, although it's written by, I think, Solomon, called Born to Rebel, which is all about birth order. He did this massive statistical study about birth order, and he's convinced that people's personalities are a direct result of all this envy they had in trying to get their parents. And with massive sweeping theories, you always have to be careful. But obviously there's an element of truth in that. So birth order is very interesting because firstborns tend to be much less rebellious, according to his research, than laterborns. In fact, most of the real rebellious type people in the history, in social history, have been laterborns, not firstborns. And he said it has to do with the fact that they see the firstborn, he's got all the perks, and so they want to rebel against that kind of status quo. And firstborns historically tend to be the ones that are always supporting the status quo and don't want. It's an interesting study. So that's tahabbub. Another one is a teacher. Students that vie for the teachers, like teachers' pets type people that want, and they have this envy. Another one is, it's called the da'u dara'ir, the disease of second wives, right? Hasad. Because if there's more than one wife in the situation, obviously there's one husband. Husbands' times tend to be limited, and so they're vying. And that's why Sharia is so adamant about being fair to the wife. If you give one to one, you have to give one to the other. Have to. That is a given. And the nights are the same. I think for that reason. Now, obviously, the word in Arabic for second wife is darra, sometimes mispronounced durra, but it's actually a darra. Darra means harm, right? That's what it means. It means harm. So obviously, I don't know if the first wife named the second wife darra or not, but it indicates that the Arabs understood something about the psychology of multiple marriages, and that the second wife will bring in a type of darra to the first wife. So that does happen. And you can get that vying for things. So that's tahabbub. And then takabbur is arrogance. That causes envy. If you see somebody getting ahead of you and you're arrogant, you see, he doesn't deserve that. I'm better than him. He should not. That's takabbur. He shouldn't have got that promotion. And this is something that some of the Arabs had like Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, Abu Jahl, They had that against the Prophet ﷺ. They thought themselves, he's Yatimu Bani Hashim. He's the orphan of Bani Hashim. He's Ibn Abi Kabsha. That's what they called him. Abi Kabsha is his father by wet nursing. So they just saw, he doesn't deserve this ni'mah of being spoken to from the heavens. We deserve it more than he does. So that's takabbur, which is, I think, pretty obvious. Ta'azzuz is less so than takabbur. Ta'azzuz has to do with a person wanting the status quo. In other words, he doesn't mind feeling the same as the other person. As long as we have the same things, it's okay. But suddenly you get the job promotion, and I didn't. And then my question is, I start saying, he's going to start looking down on me. Right? So the dynamic changes. So ta'azzuz is I'm trying to maintain my izzah. So really it's related to a poor self-esteem, and I think that's how I translated it. Poor self-worth. Ta'azzuz is an attempt to reestablish an equilibrium because you're feeling that your self-worth is compromised by the fact that another person has more than you do. And so that's also a cause of hasad. And you can see that also in the first Muslims who, when they, for instance, they said, لولا نزل هذا القرآن على رجل, right? من القريتين عظيم. Had this Quran only been revealed to a man from one of the two big cities who was great, a great man. In other words, if it would have been revealed to Walid ibn Mughira, we wouldn't mind bowing our heads to him and admitting that, you're the prophet. But this is Yatim Bani Hashim. How can he be over us? In other words, we want him to stay the same as us. So this is something that happened, afflicted those first Arabs. And also those who said, this is just هذا بشر مثلنا. Right? This is just a man like us. How can he be a prophet and we're not prophets? In other words, we don't like this idea of somebody who's a common man. If it's a king, that's all right. We can deal with that because the king's better than us. We know that. But he's my next door neighbor. Right? He shouldn't have anything better than me. So it's that idea there. And also, you find that Fir'aun says, actually that's more takabbur. But he says about Musa, that how can a prophet come and his people are our slaves, looking down on them. So these are all reasons why people reject the truth. And ta'ajjub has to do with, you just can't believe it. It's more, I can't believe. It's not takabbur, it's not ta'azzuz, it's just type of, this can't be happening. Right? This person couldn't have won the jackpot, and I've known him all my life. This can't be happening. So it's a hasad that's really related to a type of disbelief, in somebody getting a blessing that you just can't believe that he has that blessing. Doesn't make any sense. And then also, hubb al-riyasa, love of leadership. Always wanting to maintain one's position of authority. Sometimes hubb al-riyasa will lead a person to not want somebody to get a blessing just so they can maintain the position over them of authority, which is similar to takabbur, but different in a sense because he does have a position of leadership or he desires to have it over that person, and by them getting some type of blessing, it's going to lead to changing that equilibrium or creating a disequilibrium there. So, and then shuhun hati, shuh is covetousness. So that's also a cause of envy, just pure shuh. Like you see somebody has something, you just have a shahiyah, you're covetous of it, you want it. And that's a big disease, which Allah says, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Those who are saved from their shuh. Now another thing, one of the concepts that Imam al-Ghazali mentions often is because these diseases in fact are part of our nature, the process is to transform them and make them something beneficial to you. For instance, Native Americans, some of the Native American tribes in this country used to name their children names that had disabilities. Right? Like lame deer. They would give it a name that had a disability. And the reason for that was that they noticed that animals that had disabilities tended to overcompensate. And it would make them more clever than the other. They'd have to be more aware. And so there's an idea of getting your disability to become an advantage. And this is what really successful people in dunyawi terms tend to do. And what Imam al-Ghazali is saying is, this is what the ukhrawi people need to do with these disadvantageous aspects of themselves, to turn them into advantages. So for instance, hasad, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا حسد إلا في اثنتين. There's no envy except in two people. رجل أوتي مالا. He was given wealth, فسلطه على الخير. Right? He used his wealth for good. Right? And in a riwayah it says that he ينفق أناء الليل وأطراف النهار. He's giving it out by night and by day. So that's a good reason to envy that person Not that you want him to lose the envy, to lose the ni'mah, but that you actually want to be like him, to have wealth, so that you can also give out. And that is called in Arabic ghibta, which is different from hasad. Ghibta is good envy. It's a positive envy. You're envying the person. You don't want them to lose their ni'mah. You want them to keep their ni'mah. But you wish that you had what they had. And the other person is رَجُلٍ أُوتِيَ حِكْمَةً. He was given hikmah, wisdom. فَيُعَلِّمُهَا النَّاسِ. So he teaches that wisdom to people. Right? And so those two people, in other words, what we're being told is, don't envy people over petty, trivial things like dunya. It's not worth it. Envy people for things that are high things, like akhirah. And then what that will do is it'll make you set out to achieve what they've achieved. All right? So, and then he says about أَسْبَابُهُ اللَّوَاتِ مِنْ هَيَاتِ. Those are the causes. And then he says, وَنِعْمَةٌ بِكَافِرٍ أَوْ فَاجِرٍ يَقْوَى بِهَا عَلَى الْأَذَى وَيَجْتَرِي. As for a blessing that a kafir has, a non-Muslim, or a bad Muslim, fajr, somebody who's fajr, they have fujur, a profligate, somebody who does kaba'ir. A fajr is somebody who does kaba'ir openly. As for a fajr, he says, فِيهَا يَجُوزُ مَرَضُ الضَّرَائِرِ. The disease of second wives is permissible in this case. أَفَادُهُمْ مَيَّارَةُ إِبْنِ عَاشِرِ. I mean, he uses second wife because it works with the rhyme. And also I think it indicates that that's, it's a natural type of hasad. It's a good thing to have hasad towards non-Muslims but obviously that has to be because they're using it for bad things. Do you see the difference? In other words, what I was saying earlier about having envy towards non-Muslims just because they have dunya and you don't. That's not a good reason. The reason that he's saying it's a good thing to do is because they have dunya that they're using for harm. They're harming people with it and they're using it to oppress. And in that case, it's justifiable, it's permissible. And he said, Sidi Mayyara, who commented on Ibn Ashar, benefited us that. And then he says, أَمْرَ حَيَوْ الذَّمِيمُ فَالْمَانِعُ مِنْ تَغْيِيرِ مُنْكَرٍ أَوْ السُّؤَالِ عَنْ أَمْرٍ مِنَ الدِّينِ وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ الَّذِي عُدَّ مِنَ الْمَهَالِكِ. Blameworthy modesty. Modesty is a good thing, it's virtuous. الْحَيَاءُ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ. The hadith says, الْحَيَاءُ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ. Al-haya is from iman. So this haya, which is called al-haya'ul dhamim, blameworthy. This is the blameworthy modesty is a modesty that prevents you from making inkar of munkar when you see it. So you see somebody doing something wrong and you really should say something, but you're too shy. Right? You're too shy. Like a child, an adult child with the parents. There's a type of modesty because they're my parents, I can't say anything to them. A munkar is a munkar, whether it's the parents or anybody else. If it genuinely is a munkar. Now just to say a few things about munkar. There's a condition about munkar. One, a munkar has to be mujma' alayh in order to make inkar of it. It has to be agreed upon. You can't make munkar of something that's called mukhtalaf fihi, which means there's difference of opinion about it. So whenever there's difference of opinion, you have to be very careful about munkar. Because technically the munkar of one scholar might not be the munkar of another scholar. And unless it's absolutely agreed upon that it's a munkar, then you can't make inkar of it. And they said about Imam al-Ma'ziri, he was so knowledgeable that he rarely made inkar of anybody, because he could always find a dalil for a proof for their actions somewhere. So, and that's a really important thing to know now, just because there's so much, Muslims make so much inkar of each other. There's this impulse now, just everybody attacks everybody else. So, blameworthy modesty is something where you don't make inkar where you should, or to ask a question about the deen. That's blameworthy modesty, and that's why Sayyidatuna Aisha radiallahu anha said that the best women were the women of the Ansar because modesty did not prevent them from learning the deen. So she was praising them, saying that even though there's things that people would be modest about, it didn't stop them. Like the Prophet ﷺ, who somebody came to him, a woman asking about the period, and he was explaining to her, and she kept asking, and finally he just asked Aisha to show her what to do, because it was embarrassing for him. And Aisha could answer the question because she was faqihah. But the point is that that woman wanted to know. And even some of the women, they used to send in a little box the cloth from their period to ask the hukam from Aisha about the color. Right? I mean, that was like asking to make sure they understood when the hayd ended and when it started. Right? So, I mean, that's obviously most women, they would not feel comfortable with that at all because they're modest about it. But the point is, those women were so bent on doing what Allah, or so straight about doing what Allah told them to do, that their modesty didn't prevent them from doing those things. And that would tend to be more with women than with men, but it applies to both, because there are some men that are extremely modest, so they don't ask questions.